Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
So, I love The Shining. Not only I consider it to be one of the best horror films ever made, but also one of the best films ever made. Very few have been able to get under my skin through its dread-inducing atmosphere the way Stanley Kubrick has with The Shining. It's the type of horror that few storytellers use to scare the shit out of you. And yes, I'm even putting King on the same boat. I also am a fan of the way Stephen King writes horror and makes it very personal, but comparing both the Shining book and film together, there's just something more terrifying about having Danny's father figure being detached from the very beginning from his family, than a caring one that slowly is corrupted by his demons and evil forces of the Overlook Hotel. But of course, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think both King and Kubrick were telling very different stories with different intentions altogether, and both versions are in my mind masterfully written slash visual art. So it comes by no surprise my excitement to watch both the sequel for The Shining film and book, Doctor Sleep.
Hello, Danny.
I'm not gonna beat around the bush too much since the title has already spoiled it, so I'm just gonna start off by saying that I really enjoyed watching Doctor Sleep. Just like the film that came before, the way Mike Flanagan directed this one, the atmosphere, that hypnotic feeling of dread and its unsettling nature are pretty much core aspects of this sequel that I've carried over, but in a way that is also unique to the filmmaker at hand. Indeed, Doctor Sleep is a direct sequel to The Shining, but just like the book, it really stands on its own. The cinematography, the pacing, and of course the direction and shot composition are very much different from the way Kubrick and his crew constructed The Shining, except of course whenever certain scenes of The Shining will be recreated in flashbacks. The story is also pretty much its own distinct entity, as it was originally intended back when Stephen King wrote the book. Doctor Sleep was more of a story that is built around the question of what happened to Danny Torrance after the traumatic experience he underwent after the Overlook, rather than what happened to the Overlook Hotel after The Shining. After all, the ending of the book was completely different from the one of the film, so of course the sequel book would feel much more contained because that story was closed permanently. But like King himself said, not Danny's. And that's exactly how you feel watching the first two acts of this film. Sure, early on you can tell the footprint of that older story is pretty much there and it's clear where its destination lies. But you also can see how it doesn't need it per se to finish this character's main arc. But I have to admit that that connection to the events of The Shining did add more good than bad to Danny as a character, and his personal story felt more complete to me. That's not to say it was completely flawless. I did find myself a little bit disappointed with some of its choices and execution, mainly towards the end of the film. I loved how Flanagan connected the Shining film with this one, and how he was able to continue that story in a way that felt natural and respectful to what Kubrick originally intended, since a lot of the questions in that film were left ambiguous, and so I was somewhat afraid that Dr. Sleep would somewhat undermine it. But in actuality, it all perfectly fit together, and in some ways added more detail and meaning to what I already considered a masterful film. But as that third act starts to reach its conclusion, and the more time we spend in the Overlook Hotel, the more I start to lose interest in what was unfolding on screen. The emotional punch wasn't as strong anymore, mainly due to its execution. Something happens to Danny in the film that, in a way, felt to me to be something that would happen more in the Stephen King story if, for example, the Shining connection and resolution were actually written in the book the same way as the one in the film, than one that fits in the same world as The Shining from Stanley Kubrick. In a lot of ways, it would have felt more in line if it was exclusively an adaptation of the book, but it was also an adaptation of the film as well. That is why that third act in The Overlook exists in the first place. Some of its first act was also a little bit wonky. Its pacing was more clumsy than the rest of the film. Overall, it's not the same slow burn like The Shining, since the story itself was very differently structured, but it's not like it's a fast-paced film either. It's not. It slows down after those initial first minutes, introducing the world, old characters, and establishing new ones, but until it stops doing that and the story truly starts with Danny's journey towards recovery, the pacing is a little too quick. Can I say that? It definitely feels off putting when you analyze the film on its entirety. but I still will recommend it for you to see, for sure. Especially since not many people have so far, so even if you're watching this video in a time where the movie is not in theaters, please give it a shot and watch it afterwards in any way you prefer. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, sayonara.